Edward Cabrera is very hard to figure out as a pitcher. I'm going to talk about him on today's show.
You are Locked On Marlins, your daily podcast on the Miami Marlins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into Locked On Marlins. I'm your host, Jeremiah Geiger. You can find me at Jeremiah Geiger2 over on X. And thank you for making Locked On Marlins your first listen of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and let me know your thoughts, of course, in the comments section. On today's show, I'm going to be talking about Edward Cabrera. What does a good season look for him? And what does that mean for the Marlins moving forward? Can he be a factor in the long-term plans for Miami? I'm going to talk about some trade rumors with Sandy Alcantara and take a look at the Marlins middle infield, Jared Serna, Max Acosta. They're doing good things in spring training so far. But of course, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Edward Cabrera has been really tough to understand as a starting pitcher. He has all the stuff. He throws extremely hard. He has a really good changeup. The issue for him has always been the command. Can he limit the free passes? Because if you're walking a ton of people, it doesn't matter how good your stuff is. Your outings are going to be shorter. You're not going to pitch deep into games, and you're going to get yourself into trouble. And we've seen that time and time again over the last few years. Cabrera is not a young Marlin. He's not somebody that's new to Major League Baseball at all. He's been in the big leagues since 2021. So this is his fifth season as a pitcher in the Marlins organization. And that's a really long leash the Marlins have afforded him. This 5 seasons now, where you're going into a season hoping that he'll be able to put it all together. And at some point, you have to take a step back, perhaps, and ask yourself, do we already know what he is? Is this somebody that is going to be a consistent major league starter for you and give you 28 to 30, 32 starts a season? I don't think so. I just have a hard time envisioning Cabrera taking that huge leap forward. We've seen it time and time again. He's been offered so many opportunities. And when I look at the stuff he has, I understand why the Marlins organization loves him. Because you want to see a pitcher with the arsenal he has, the changeup that he possesses, the velocity's there. He checks so many boxes, but he's never been able to do it consistently. And at some point, you need to find consistency. Otherwise, it's going to cost you games. Cabrera's started 2 games in spring training so far. And the funny thing about it, he hasn't walked anybody. So you're seeing improved command. You're seeing him fill up the strike zone. And I'd be thrilled. But the issue is, in his first start, he got hit around, gave up multiple runs. And in his second start, his most recent start against the Cardinals, he limited the damage, but batters were teeing off on him. Exit velocity, 94 miles an hour on average. So hitters are finding the barrel against Cabrera. And that's partly due to the fact that he's throwing so many strikes. So I think about Edward Cabrera and the long-term plans for the Marlins, because this isn't a season in which the Marlins are expected to compete. Because I think on a competitive team, on any competitive team, I don't think Cabrera is in the rotation. I don't think you look at the New York Mets, for example, and you take a look. Edward Cabrera has been in that organization for 5 seasons and is still given an opportunity to start. As a Marlins fan, I'm not studying every single other team in depth and how they run their organization as much as I do the Marlins. But I find it hard to believe that these other organizations would still be giving Cabrera an opportunity. I want Cabrera to succeed. I hope this is the season he puts it all together. And you check back with me August 1st, and his ERA's in the low threes, and he started every 5th day without injury. He's limited the walks. He's going 5, 6, 7 innings into ball games. But history tells us otherwise when it comes to him. So there's a couple options the Marlins can do if he struggles. One is make him a reliever. Make the transition from starting pitcher into a relief pitcher. Because with a guy that throws that hard, has a slider and a changeup that are very good, and only the big focus has been on the command, and that's holding him back, then making him into a reliever, you could have a real weapon down the road. Imagine Edward Cabrera one day being a closer. The profile is there. Really hard thrower. He has multiple offerings, so that's a plus. You don't have to rely on just 2 pitches. You can throw in that slider. You can throw that changeup. You have the sinker. There's a lot to like when I imagine Edward Cabrera in the bullpen. Because I don't think he's going, I don't know, but it's hard to imagine him finishing 2025 as a consistent starter. So if you want to retain him in the organization, and he will be in ARB 2 next year, so he'll be in arbitration, then eventually making the decision to convert him to a reliever is one option. And it's something that's been thrown around. The idea has been thrown around. Could Edward Cabrera be a reliever? I think yes. I think he could be a very good one. I think he could be a very good starter based on his stuff. But of course, it takes more than just good stuff. It takes command, which he historically hasn't shown. And although spring training has been really encouraging, getting hit that hard in the strike zone, that worries me. But you can also, if he does well, and this is the flip side of it. So the pessimist in me right now is saying, Edward Cabrera, I just don't think you're going to see him finish the year as a consistent starter. That's the pessimist in me. The optimist in me, when it comes to Cabrera, says, you know what? He's figured out the command. These early spring training results, they're positive for a reason. It's not a fluke. He's going to limit the walks, and the Marlins are going to have what I'm going to call another trade asset at the deadline. Because again, he's in his arbitration years. So based on his performance, that salary, that yearly value is going to rise. And maybe it stays around the same. Maybe they find a way to avoid arbitration. But in the best case scenario for Cabrera and for the Marlins, he pitches really well and he establishes himself as a consistent starter. Then you're looking at a guy with multiple years of control. He's cheap because he's in his ARB years. And you don't think a team will be picking up the phone and calling Peter Bendix and asking about his trade availability? There's a lot of talk about Sandy and trade talk surrounding him, trade rumors. Oh, he'd be a good fit with the Mets, a good fit with the Orioles. That's coming up in the next segment. But Edward Cabrera, if he pitches well, can absolutely be a trade asset at the deadline. Of course, the obvious trade asset is Sandy Alcantara. I'm going to talk about him. I'm going to talk about the trade rumors and teams to watch for. Everything about that, that's going to be coming up right after this. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. You will love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether you're backing your team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch for three, you'll never feel like you missed your chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Glad you're with me here on Locked On Marlins, on YouTube channel if you're watching, on all the streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple. Locked On Marlins, of course, is your daily stop to get the best Marlins content. So if you're an everyday listener, I thank you. And if you are just checking in, this is your first episode, maybe second episode, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more content. So we've talked about Edward Cabrera and the potential of him becoming a trade asset. The obvious trade asset that the Marlins do have, he's the biggest fish in the pond. And you could argue that this season, he will be the biggest trade chip, potential trade chip that will be talked about. Every single organization would love to have Sandy Alcantara. Every single one. You think of teams that are in obvious competitive windows. They're ready to go compete for a World Series. Maybe they feel that Sandy Alcantara is what gets them over the top and really gets them the opportunity to shore up their rotation and make a run at the whole thing. They're going to be calling for Sandy Alcantara. There's so much to like about Sandy. From a leadership perspective, the mentality he brings on the mound, and just his performance. I mean, he is a Cy Young winner who in 2022 posted 8 WAR. He's a absolute stud. And with the Marlins rebuilding, it's natural to assume that a trade feels imminent because it does. And it's going to hurt as a fan. It's going to hurt very much because I love Sandy Alcantara. I love him on the Marlins. And you never want to see a player like that get traded. But where would he go? There are so many rumors and ideas floating out there in the MLB universe right now. The Red Sox. Could he be a trade fit? Of course. Could the Orioles and Mets are another two who feel like perfect candidates to try to go get Sandy Alcantara. If I, as a fan, I really don't want to see Sandy Alcantara go to the Mets. The Orioles feels almost perfect from both sides, each of their perspectives, where the Marlins aren't trading him to a National League team or a division rival, but the Orioles, they need that starting pitcher after losing Corbin Burns. It makes sense. It also makes sense for him to go to the Mets, dealing with the injuries they have. And I don't know if Sandy Alcantara is going to stick around in Miami to the deadline. I don't know if the Marlins, they're obviously hyping him up. Peter Bendix, Bruce Sherman, they're hyping him up. He's going to be starting opening day. That's already been announced against Paul Skeens. But how many more starts are we going to see? We've seen Peter Bendix pull the trigger on trades a little bit earlier than people usually expect. I don't see any difference from this one why he wouldn't do that. Because he traded Jesus Luzardo in the offseason before Luzardo got back pitching in real games in spring training. He traded him at the winter meetings. And that was coming off of an injury. He's traded Luis Arias in May. He traded Jake Berger in the winter meetings, who had multiple years of control. And Sandy Alcantara, the biggest thing for him was proving his health. That's the only thing people want to see. Around the league, the question was, is Sandy healthy? How does he respond coming off of Tommy John? And the answer, his arm is fine. It's more than fine. It's elite. And teams will be calling Peter Bendix. You think about opening day at the end of March, and then we'll say April, May, June, July. That's 4 months where when you look at the Marlins, they're probably going to be out of contention very early on. The Marlins could trade him early. I'm preparing you guys for that possibility. They don't have to trade Sandy Alcantara. That is one thing everybody has to understand, is you're going to have people who say the Marlins have to trade Sandy. They don't have to. He's under contract for 2 more years, and then he has a club option for $21 million, which of course the Marlins should exercise. So theoretically, he could be in town for another 3 seasons. It's a very team-friendly deal. So from that perspective, there's really no rush to trade him. You don't have to. The contract, though, it's a little bit expensive for the Marlins perspective. For other teams, yeah, that's a team-friendly deal, and it is. For an ace pitcher, he's making $17 million this year. That is a team-friendly deal. But it's an outlier. The Marlins don't spend money on players. They just don't. They're not handing out free agent contracts. They're not extending players within their system right now. Not that they necessarily have to extend anybody at this point. I think you want to see guys continue to prove themselves, like Connor Norby, who could be a potential extension candidate one day. But it's obvious. The Marlins don't like spending money. So you factor in their rebuilding. They don't spend money. Sandy's contract, although it's quote-unquote team-friendly for the Marlins, that's an outlier. The writing's on the wall for Sandy to be traded, and be traded early this season. I don't want to see him go to the Mets. There is no universe in which I would be happy with Sandy Alcantara, our ace, getting traded to a division rival. It was bad enough with Luzardo, because now you're going to have to see this guy. But Sandy is a much better pitcher than Jesus Luzardo. You have to nail this deal. You have to nail it. There's no margin for error when it comes to trading Sandy Alcantara. Because not only are you trading for a haul of prospects and probably major league ready talent, a combination, you have to figure out the right combination, guys who can come in under team control and just play every day, kind of like Connor Norby and Stowers did. But you're going to have to make sure that it's the best possible offer you can get. There cannot be a questionable trade. It just can't happen. Because from a fan's perspective, people are going to be angry and hurt and disappointed at this trade. When it happens, there's going to be backlash. So maximizing the return is key. There's no universe in which you make this trade and ESPN's grading system, when they rate the trade for both teams, has you anything less than an A. It should be a consensus A plus for the Marlins across the board. Every prospect outlet, every media personnel who writes about prospects should all be, wow, the Marlins got an awesome return. Nothing less. Because I've prepared myself for the possibility and the likelihood that this will happen. But the Orioles, the Mets, and the Red Sox are the three names to watch for. Don't trade them to the Mets. Please don't do that. Coming up next, I'm going to be talking about the Marlins middle infield. They have a lot of guys there. Jared Serna, Max Acosta, they've both been very impressive so far in spring training. That's coming up right after this. Locked On Marlins is a great way to start off your day, but of course, check out Locked On MLB for your second listen of the day, or Locked On Phillies, Locked On Orioles. All the teams have a Locked On podcast, so go over and check that out if you're interested in learning about the recent news or rumors surrounding any team in Major League Baseball. But I'm glad you are listening or watching Locked On Marlins. We talked about Sandy Alcantara. Let's move on to the middle infield. Max Acosta and Jared Serna have been very impressive to start spring training. Jared Serna with a home run against the Cardinals in the most recent game. Max Acosta homered a couple games ago. He's playing very good defense at shortstop, and I think he's eliminating questions that he wasn't going to be able to stick there in the future, which is awesome. I am becoming, and I already am, a Max Acosta believer. I am a Jared Serna believer. You pair Serna at second, you put Acosta at short, you envision that in the Marlins' future. It's exciting. They have Otto Lopez at second base right now. They have Xavier Edwards at shortstop. But to add two more pieces who are already showing up in spring, in the games, and impressing the organization, that creates a good problem for the Marlins moving forward. Acosta, I think you see debut this season. I really do, at some point. The Marlins are going to have a question. They're going to have to ask themselves this question when it comes to the middle infield. What will this look like in 2026? What will this look like in the back half of 2025? Is Otto Lopez somebody who is going to play 140 plus games, assuming he stays healthy, for the majority of the season? Is Xavier Edwards going to stick at shortstop? I don't think Xavier Edwards is the natural fit at shortstop. He doesn't have the arm. Max Acosta does. Max Acosta has shown some really good range. Otto Lopez had a great season defensively. But if Jared Serna starts out in AAA and is tearing it up, does he get a call up in the second half? What will that look like moving forward? It's a great problem to have from an organizational perspective, though. You want to build levels of depth throughout your system. And with the Marlins middle infield, they're doing that, and they're doing that well. It's not going to be long before you see them reap the benefits of this on the major league field. You already saw it last year when they struck gold by acquiring Otto Lopez via waivers. He was a waiver claim. You saw Xavier Edwards. He came over from Tampa Bay. He's been in the minors. Finally makes his season debut last year after battling a health issue and hits above 300. So him doing it over an entire season, I'm excited for it. And then you look further down in the Marlins system. Starlin Caba, who is widely regarded as one of the best defensive shortstops in all of minor league baseball. And he's still very, very young. He'll start out in Jupiter, adjusting to low A hitting. You know, it's a step above rookie ball. It's going to be a slow development with him. He's not advanced as Acosta, of course, or Serna, but the Marlins infield depth for the foreseeable future looks good. Now, what will it look like in 2026? Let's take a step ahead and look at the Marlins infield in 2026. Connor Norby, does he move to the outfield one day? That's a question. Does he stay at third? A lot will be determined this season if he can make a successful adjustment to playing third base and playing third base well, because that was a position he just struggled there. He struggled at third. Xavier Edwards, when it comes to shortstop, I think there's a scenario in early 2026 spring training where Acosta, if he's not already in the majors and playing shortstop, there's an argument for him to be the starting shortstop opening day, because I think that glove is that impressive. It's a much better defensive profile than Xavier Edwards. But you don't want to take Xavier Edwards' bat out of the lineup either. And then you look at Otto Lopez. Now, what I've said about Otto Lopez is that I think he's a great player. I think he's a good player. Not a great player, but a good player. He's solid. But he's not somebody, he comes over off of waivers, and he was a very successful rookie season. But it's not somebody that I think is going to be the long-term second baseman for this organization. I really do believe in Jared Serna, and I think that could be his position in 2026. You're in no rush if you're Peter Bendix to get rid of Otto Lopez, but I do believe he's expendable. I do believe there's a lot of hype surrounding him from a lot of fans coming off a season in which, he was top 3, top 5 in outs above average at second base. I believe he finished second, which is awesome. He's right up there with a guy like Bryce Turang as a very good defender so far. Now, the hit tool, he doesn't have a lot of power. He hit about 270 last year. Can he hit that again? Does the average dip? In his second season, there's still questions surrounding Lopez. I don't think he's somebody who has a ceiling as high as Jared Serna does. I think Serna's ceiling is a 15, 20 homer guy who can hit 35, 40 doubles and hit at a 275, 280 clip and play solid second base defense. You're hitting for a lot of extra bases, and that's something, of course, to speculate and dream on. But I just don't think Lopez has the offensive ceiling that Serna does or Max Acosta does. And so if he has a first half in which he's producing and he's playing really good defense, then the Marlins could possibly trade him. And they could possibly decide to trade him after 2025 when they feel that Serna is ready for an everyday role. Now, there's still a lot of time. And this isn't to hate on Otto Lopez, but at the end of the day, I don't think he is a franchise cornerstone that you're building around. I don't think he has the same potential that Connor Norby does. Or you look at guys coming up through the system, like I said, Max Acosta, Jared Serna, their ceiling is just higher. That's going to do it for today's Locked on Marlins. Of course, thank you guys for listening. Stay safe, and until next time, let's go fish.